All right, awesome. So the recording is available, so I'm gonna make sure that it doesn't get lost. How do I know actually where I hit it to record? Anyways, I'm gonna look for it later. All right, so thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Kriss, for hanging by. He's probably there lurking and listening, but he might not be able to participate. Obviously, we recognize the value and uncertainty and also lots of questions in such an important step and undertaking as Fund 10 has become, especially with the new challenges and everything around it. So, the initial part of the conversation on the town hall was to level set and essentially continue this conversation now. The best way to go around, as you know, is to raise your hand and we can go around the room and try to have a conversation. I will preface that we're unlikely to have answer to everything. We're going to be trying to work out and actually brainstorm through a lot of things, not only in this breakout room, but also down the line as we try to navigate the next weeks and months and whatnot. So again, thank you, Nigel, for making the time. I know it's extremely busy, not only within the Catalyst. We don't seem to have enough hours in a day, and in Voltaire, it's nothing different either. So again, I appreciate your time here today, and let's have a circle around the fire, and let's have some good conversations. So I appreciate everybody's courtesy, respectful discourse as always, and we're gonna do the raise the hand options. All right, Joey, thank you for being here today. How are you doing? What is on your mind?
Doing good. So I asked the question about what happens if it does not get funded. And I guess reading between the lines, it sounds as though we're kind of between a rock and a hard place, that you need the funding in order to continue with all the activities that you're doing at this point. And because maybe there's going to be another pause coming from the Treasury. Am I reading that right or not?
There will be a pause as soon as basically we've got 1694 hard forked, right? Because we can't help it. Because in order to be able to take decisions in the online governance world, we've got to train a load of delegated representatives. And that was basically part of the design with the Bootstrap period. So anyone that is going to take on the fund operations will need to make sure that they've organized the voting process to withdraw sufficient Treasury funding to continue funds during that Bootstrap period. So, and I can see the different points from Tommy going in there, that it's not easy. We want to put ourselves onto a competitive footing. We've done this thing inside and out. You can see from the proposal just how much work and effort it takes and the size of the team. Does it mean that somebody couldn't take it on from October? No. Is it hard? Yes. You've got to be able to compete with the level of competency that we've got within this team right now. And it's like taking on any other kind of infrastructure. If you looked at the telecommunications industry, it had the same thing where you got like one provider, but now we're in a highly competitive industry where over time we've been able to develop competition within that industry so that people can compete with the original provider. And that's where we're trying to get everybody. But I think in this first period, it's probably the largest and hardest challenge. But going forwards from 1 year to the next, we'll end up in a much more competitive environment.
Thank you, Nigel. Joey, how does that address your thoughts that you've had so far?
Well, I'm curious because right now you're being funded through IOG to do pretty much the same functions. So is that funding going to stop and you're going to move into the community treasury, or is that both happening at the same time?
That's the proposal. So basically, Catalyst then becomes a self-sustaining system from Cardano. So anybody running the fund operations is funded in the same way as the projects.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joey. Tevo, thank you for being here today. The floor is yours.
I'm wondering about the strategy. Like the challenge settings expects 2.2 million or something. And now I'm wondering that in the proposal, you're suggesting to ask 6 to actually do multiple, not just one funding round. So would that mean the next Fund 11, there is no Catalyst Fund Operations, because in this one challenge, you're requesting 3 funds in one go? And wouldn't it be easier than to say in challenge settings that the reach is much bigger than just one fund? Or you were expecting that perhaps if there is a community that is able to do one fund, then they have the opportunity to do like a small part, and you probably it's just addressing like 3 funds in one go. Or how was the thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, basically, because we've been running this as a bit, as an operation for years now, we knew we needed to be able to figure out what the funding looked like over a year. Yet we were constrained by the funding rules that basically we had to apply for funding within that one fund. So we set out what we thought was reasonable, and we set out a fund operations cost to be roughly 3%, which we think is a reasonable charge for anybody running an innovation fund. But in order to be able to sustain the Catalyst team as it is right now, then we need that same 3% every time we do a fund, because we've got the level of service that we provide within this innovation fund. That's the cost. That's how much it costs us to basically run both the staff and the technology. Now, once we made the proposals, so that basically we make a pitch for a year, and then that would enable us to be able to give consistent funding to the community for a year, but then allow once again other people to compete. And we think that's a fair basis for anybody running the fund operations, that to be able to scale up and be able to run an operation of this size takes time, and you want to make sure that you've got a sufficient runway to give it your best shot. So we thought a yearly renewable or review position is something that is reasonable.
Why not describe that in challenge settings? Because in challenge you can just describe exactly one fund rewards, and proposal you disqualify
it could have been
yourself.
an oversight. I mean, you look at the detail we've put into that proposal, and all the detail that we've put on all of it. We've done as much as we can to be as transparent as possible, and we've given as much detail as we can. But as always with anything that we do, right? We're trying. Doesn't mean that actually we're going to get it perfect. We're never going to get it perfect. Every time that we see something, we think, oh yeah, we could have done that better, or we could do this better. And we'll just keep improving.
Thank you, Tevo. And I think that's an important point, because we're also often so close to the process that this reflection, like the 2020 hindsight is always perfect. And, looking through the challenge brief itself, it does stipulate that it expects a plan over the period of on annual basis, based off the fact that the challenge itself is tied to a single funding round as a Fund 10. But as Nigel said, that there's probably could have been done looking at in the hindsight a better and clearer description that would actually level set this challenge even more. But these are good points, Tevo. Thank you.
Danny, can you take Yao's question real quick? It's unrelated to our room, but she needs it to move on.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so what I'll need to do is I'll need to leave this room. I don't know if the recording will stop, so I'm a little bit in a tricky situation, because I'm the host, and if I leave, the recording might break.
Cause a problem temporarily for your recording. It will pick back up, but it does cause a problem for your recording.
All right, so how about we hold for 5 seconds, for 30 seconds. I'll go back to the main room and I'll come back. Please be nice to Nigel. I haven't left him alone in a room like this before. All right, let me Yao, so let's go to the main room. I'm gonna give you there a privilege, and I'm gonna come back in a second. Apologies, I'll be here in a sec.
Yeah.
we go. It was like a magic. It actually, in all of these things, I forgot that the main settings were not enabled thoroughly. So, all right, awesome. Thank you for bearing with me, and apologies for the interruption. Thorsten, good day to you. Floor is yours.
Kind of buttered me up already. So, and first of all, kind of like IOG did an amazing job so far. Obviously, wherever there is the bright shining stuff, there is also shadow. So there are things which obviously the community not always is happy about. But overall, kind of, we can see that what happened in the last 9 funds and now with Fund 10, from an operational perspective, kudos for that one. Having said that, there are a few things which kind of you can observe and just give that as a reflection. Obviously, kind of this is a new situation with the funding in itself, and that you kind of now has to come in front of the community yourself. I see that there is not really a level playing field. I understand that at this moment in time, it might not even be possible, but everyone else has to pitch in a proposal in the same way. It's not a specific effort. That's kind of the life of a proposer, and it's hard work, and you don't know whether it pays off. So on that side, I get it. You put a lot of work into that to be transparent, but that's the case for every single proposal. You have to assume that everyone is kind of working as hard, also if they're not working for IOG in this context. So that's probably kind of a little bit of a pitchfork on that side. The second thing in itself is, and it kind of is a notion. Obviously, you're using the stage in itself of the main town hall also to prep this meeting now. If you would be in a presidential election, it would be kind of like give everyone the same chance. Obviously, that's not kind of possible, but it kind of shifts things a little bit around. So kind of my view on that one is, okay, for the Fund 10, realistically, it's probably not possible to do a handover, but and I'm not saying that at the end of the day will be the result. It's just like, it's not a really collaborative approach to say kind of if it doesn't get funded, it's all over, which more or less kind of implies like, guys, if you don't vote for us, you more or less walk into uncertainty. That's actually not the community approach on that one. So that's just my comment on the side. So I feel that other people have proposed they don't have the same stage, number one, and secondly, don't kind of, and I'm using a really bad word now, blackmail the community to say if you don't want for us, kind of the world will go over a cliff. No one wants this. Everyone wants to kind of continue Catalyst and wants to have it successful. So my notion for you guys is kind of think about how you can open up, perhaps also from an operational side, and bring people from the community in, so that effectively some of the issues which the community kind of perceives might get addressed also by inclusion, rather than kind of a decision from one or the other. So I can see that kind of like Fund 11 and 12 might have opportunities with the people which you have on board, but it might actually be that including some people who are not part of the team right now would give a long leeway to address some of the issues.
Well, I mean, thank you, Thorsten. And you're right, I can't answer all of that. And I can't stop, the position that we're in. We're taking ourselves from being a free service into something that we expect to run that which is funded, and taking us into a new level where we hope to be a successful business. Now, that's a paradigm shift, but I think it's reasonable to say, look, we can't leave it where it is, because ultimately, IOG is going to say, well, why am I going to keep doing this for free? So I think things do have to change, and this was our shot at trying to make that change. Now, in terms of inclusion, part of our setup includes suppliers from the community anyway. So we already are a community-based team, and we will continue to use community suppliers to come and help us out, right? And I think we will continue to do that going forwards. And there's nothing wrong, as well as we set up these different funds. We'll be asking the community to help us set up those different categories. We'll be taking feedback, And sure, we can see if we can find different things that they can do to help us run the fund operations. That's also part of where 1694 is trying to take us. So it isn't just a handful of people that can get access into the treasury, but it's done in a sustainable and secure way that's wide across the community. Now, I can't change the fact that actually, you know, this is in terms of a competitive proposal or an area is difficult for people, but it is definitely something that people could compete with. But you'd have to be the same competency or similar competency as what is the position that Catalyst are in now. And I can't change that. I don't think anybody would want to, right? What we're trying to do is get us to the point where over the next future, over the next sort of year, we can get ourselves to the position where other people are as competitive. And we might be able to then carve it up, just like in other infrastructures or ecosystems. Maybe it's not all 100% the Catalyst team. Maybe it's carved out so that part of it is run by a different team. Likewise, with Catalyst, we want to be able to compete and run innovations for other blockchains too. That's part of the model.
Just to be, if I may, it sounds a lot like criticism. I more or less appreciate the fact that you're opening up and that we're actually kind of seeing that you're going on that pathway. So I give you kudos for that one. And I also appreciate the fact that for Fund 10, it becomes extremely hard if there is a situation which is kind of like, it doesn't go the way you are assuming it will go, that we have stability and contingency in that one. But all that given, for 11 and 12, we have to kind of find the modus which kind of levels the field, the playing field a little bit more than the situation we are having right in Fund 10. So
and I'd agree with that. I would just try and say, look, it's going to take us a year to try and really properly level that field.
I totally get this. The point I'm trying to make is, and this is my challenge actually out to you. I will definitely vote that you more or less get funded. Just to make a clear statement. Of course, I believe stability is more important than more or less kind of saying I want to have change, even if there might be a reason, good reason or bad reason for that one. But we have to kind of also, out of this commitment from the community to you as a team, put that together with a challenge, which is you have to level the playing field so that competitiveness in itself is actually possible. I totally understand for Fund 10, not possible at this moment in time. That's the reason why I said what I just said.
I like that. You could actually make Fund 11 a category to actually, enable us to try to kind of train people up, right? That would help us, provide that level of competition.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea.
And it's something that could definitely take root in the upcoming Fund 11 categorization workshops. As you know, like those are not 100% nailed down. There is an umbrella of a direction that we would like to proceed, given all the challenges that how it's been done in the past and inconsistency with these things. So there'll be at least 4 workshops to go through where we can actually put those elements, and that's why we're keeping that open, that it's not finalized, so that we can get the ideas like this on the table and see like where do they make sense and how do they go about. Before I'll forward to the next speaker, I think there's an interesting a thought in the chat as well, and I think that would probably speak to Stephen's point that the Catalyst systems improvement, and especially the category that we're especially keen to start figuring out in the next coming. Obviously, we're busy with a couple of the proposals to lay the foundation. But as the capacity grows over the funds to come, we will totally, and again, I'm speaking for myself. So if I misinterpret anything, Stephen, just shoot me down. But I'm thinking through the lenses of when we talk about co-creation and co-building, these are not just the words that we're trying to repeat, but trying to reinstate them over the next year of what it actually looks like to be walking in those kind of shoes. And I think we totally imagine the space in, for example, Catalyst systems improvements come Fund 11, come Fund 12, to not only be, let's say, submitting a proposal for this, but co-submitting it or co-endorsing it with somebody else, so that we can essentially build in a unison, in a direction, and start shadowing certain things. Stephen, I don't know if you wanted to chime a bit of a thoughts of like, how do you see that?
That's exactly right. So and I'm not going to talk in depth about our proposals. We'll do that in a different forum. But what we're trying to do with Catalyst systems improvements is build a structure whereby we can actually meaningfully co-collaborate to build out all of the features of Catalyst that we want. And some of those are competing features, or they're features that are complementary. So, some people want quadratic voting, some people don't. So we want to be able to build the system out in such a way that, okay, well, we could build a quadratic voting function, and we could build a different kind of voting function, and they could exist simultaneously within Catalyst. And we can just use the features that make sense in a particular challenge or in a particular fund or in a particular use case. We also want to be able to build out Catalyst so that it's not just for Catalyst, that it's actually a reusable system. So like a DAO could use it to build their own voting infrastructure. And so we see the Catalyst systems improvements as vital to actually allowing the community to build that out in the way they see. So the way we're proposing those is, and that's why there's special conditions in the challenge itself that say they have to be open source, they have to be Apache 2, there can't be SaaS services that back it up. Because if we do that, then we're actually straddling the community with, well, you're going to have to pay this service provider for however much money for however long simply to get that feature. And when we've already gone down that road with IdeaScale, we know it's not a viable alternative. We have to have an IdeaScale replacement that the community can self-deploy and run itself and doesn't have to pay a third party to have access to. Because if it does, and that third party fails on us, well, now we don't have Catalyst anymore. So the Catalyst systems improvements are all about self-determining not only, our future operation, but self-determining our future stack so that it is fully self-operated and operable, right? Without anybody holding the reins to it. It's quite a different category to the others, where it's quite acceptable to build a DApp that has SaaS services backing it up, and we understand why you would. But for Catalyst systems improvements, it doesn't really fit because of those reasons. Right. So that's how we sort of see that. And so we're trying to get the community to understand that and build specifically to improve the whole ecosystem for everybody in that regard.
Thank you, Stephen. All right. Jorge, thank you for being patient and being here with us and listening in. Floor is yours.
Hey guys, how you doing? So yeah, this is my first fund. This is less about proposals and more about just the community review stage as a whole. This is my first fund and I'm just getting involved, and some of the proposals I'm assigned to review I don't totally understand and I think are like awful, and their budgets just aren't transparent, and I don't feel totally comfortable being as critical as I want to. And I just kind of wanted some feedback from the community, how you guys approach this assessment stage, and is there like a penalty for not reviewing some of the proposals you've been assigned? And I just kind of want some more information on that. So whoever can answer that.
Thank you, Jorge. Obviously, I know the answer, but if anyone would like to recap for the room, feel free to open up the mic and give a shot at it.
Perhaps I invite you to open room 1, and then this discussion can continue here, and then I will give you some insights.
Cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure if this was the proper forum, but that was my question. So yeah, you can move on.
Amazing, Tevo. But the TLDR is you should not be afraid to voice your opinions in this round. That's one major change in how the reviews have been done in the past. And there's only basically a couple of rules on moderation. So just follow Tevo and he's going to tell you. But this round is about resurfacing opinions as such. So critical is good, as long as it's respectful and constructive.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. And thank you for stepping up and asking.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. And that's a segue to you, Mr. Lloyd. How are you doing today? Thank you for being here.
Thanks. Thank you for having this forum. Just a quick statement to kind of open up so everybody understands my position in this. At Edinburgh, I stood up and said, hey, if we don't have the ability to put 50 million ADA in a single transaction for Catalyst, we have a problem, because we have this extant issue where we need 50 million ADA every quarter, roughly, or somewhere around there every 4 months in order to fund Catalyst operations. So that was a big part of the discussion at Edinburgh. That was a somewhat contentious issue that we actually didn't resolve while we were there. my take on this idea of standing up the Catalyst team and having them voted on for this round, where they really are the only ones that are capable in the short term, is a step in the right direction. It's not, we're not fully there, but it is a step in the right direction where we're holding you accountable and you're providing the metrics that you're going to work by, and we can at least now look at those metrics and determine if you're, as a community, if you're meeting them in the future. So from a, and I've said this publicly for a couple of weeks now, what voting for this is that we're voting for another 150 million ADA from the Treasury to be returned to the community through the Innovation Fund. If not voting for this particular team to do this particular effort leaves a huge amount of uncertainty for the whole community. And at this point, that's a valve I don't want to turn. That's that to me is too much of an unsafe move, especially after the long pause after Fund 9. So voting for you guys is a vote of confidence at this point. I do think that you guys have done a good job up to this point with what we've had. And I do believe that supporting you is the right approach for now. And that I'm looking forward to seeing real competition in the future. So
yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, Lloyd. I mean, one of the things that we noticed over this past year, we had a really lumpy, when were we going to do Fund 10? We were arguing about it internally at IOG. We found that really difficult. And by turning this around and putting ourselves on a professional footing, we said our service, we will deliver 3 funds in this next year, right? And that means you guys are expecting that, and you're going to hold us accountable to deliver that. So it turns it around from us trying to, you know, at IOG suggesting that this is the way it should be and then arguing about it, to the community driving it and saying, I want 3 funds, right? And and then the service provider having to meet it. I like that orientation. It's cleaner. It makes us feel more comfortable. It makes us feel that actually we're not calling the shots, someone else is, and we're just basically providing the operation to unlock that funding.
Okay. And so that's what leads to my, there are 3 questions. They all lead from one to the other, but we'll go through them. I think we can get through them pretty quickly. Okay. The first is will there be a Voltaire vote for Catalyst for any of 11, 12, or 13, or is this baked in? In other words, do we have this funding already guaranteed, or is that a additional step that we'll have to go through once we've switched over to Voltaire?
It is a very good question. I think we'd assumed we would basically just, you know, allocate the Fund 10, and then we've got to work out when we do the rest. Now, as 1694 implementation becomes clearer, we know as soon as we hit that bootstrap period, we're going to need to take down that initial funding before that. Now, you know, I guess at the moment we think that if we win that proposal, we've got the community buy-in to do that funding. But we'll probably come back to the community to say, look, you know, because of this 1694 implementation, we might have to kind of download 2 funds in one, right? But we'd have to just try and, you know, as we approach that, as we kind of line up the plans, you know, we'll figure out the right way to come back to the community to ask.
So fair enough. So we don't, that is a degree of uncertainty that we have going into Voltaire. We don't know for sure. We don't have, they're not carving out 200 million right now and saying that's definitely going to Catalyst. That's something that we're going to have to work through as Voltaire progresses.
Yeah.
That's fair assessment. The next one is, now this goes to building competition. When will the next year proposal competition take place? Is it also going to be after the delivery of all of these funds and we're up against a very quick turnover to a new team, or are we going to start to evaluate an idea of having some leeway, some time in between prior to doing that?
Well, I was thinking about this actually. It's a good point, because I think it's a way that we can improve the approach of what we've done. We've basically proposed that any operator should get at least a year to run the operation. And what we might want to do in the next proposal category is say, okay, there's got to be not in conjunction with the next operator to run it for a year. There has to be the old operator who's got to basically shadow it for 3 months or 6 months or however months is sensible. So it's like a win-win. If we've got to hand it over, there's a bit of there's proper paid handover time, and then the other winner then can take it forward from there.
Okay, fair enough. And I think that is one of the things that's going to allow competition to flourish. I liked the idea also of breaking it up. I think that was my also initial thing, was rather than a winner takes all category, more or less that there are categorical elements that maybe one team only takes on one element or another, you know, as we grow. So I wanted to kudo that idea as well, because I thought that's another sensible approach to doing that. My third and final question actually has to do with the working groups proposal. I know it didn't make it through, that did not end up being one of the Catalyst improvement proposals that made it in time for Fund 10. But I feel like that's critical to the community being able to start taking on elements of this. What are you guys planning to have that in Fund 11? Is that going to be under the Catalyst improvements area instead of in the main you know, Catalyst management fund? Is that just going to get funded from that other area so that we can start getting working groups that are, you know, compensated to getting this work done of building the, you know, these next elements for the community?
I know. I mean, Kriss might have been better to answer that question, to be honest.
Unfortunately, yeah.
He's currently busy.
Hey guys, I'm actually here.
Oh hell!
I'm actually. Yeah, we're giving birth at home, and I was having a shower, and it's all good. So I'm packing clothes away. So listen, when we get to the point of Fund 11, of course, if we think about where we are today with the proposals, this is basic infrastructure. Once we get the basics right, the next step is let's build out what else we need to build out, which will be committees, working groups, making sure all of the collaborators and contributors have, you know, some certainty of resources, if that's the will of the community to go that way. Obviously, we've got this opportunity now, and it's not a one and done. This is, you know, we get to understand what we should be doing next once we've taken care of this important moment. Mm-hmm. On that note, I'm going to disappear again.
May your wife forgive us.
I may consider booting you from the call, so don't be surprised.
No, please. This is helping me. Cheers, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Kriss. Appreciate that very much. All right, thank you. And for now, those were my questions, and they've been sufficiently answered. Thanks, guys, for the moments here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. Stephen, thank you for being patient. The hand must be hurting. It's been holding up for a while. How are you doing? Floor is yours.
I'm fine, and thank you, Nigel, for stepping up for the answering questions on the operational proposal. One of the fascinating things about this proposal, it seems, is there's a structural transition plan, and I just want to see if my impression of this is correct, Nigel. The first one is to establish legal clarity, which I imagine is something to do with establishing clarity on community IEP or AIDA risks, that kind of thing. Then you move into a separation of powers between a catalyst funding vehicle and the funding team. Okay, and then the final thing that would wrap that up in a nice little bow is a service level agreement. The only thing I can see missing from all this is a risk assessment on the transition. Is that, would you say my assessment of your approach is correct? And could you say more about how the separation of the catalyst funding vehicle will be achieved?
Well, what we're trying to do is trying to get ourselves into this position where we can draw down everything for one fund and hold it in a legal vehicle where the beneficiaries are the whole Cardano community. And so that means then that we don't have to keep going in to take small withdrawals out of the treasury, which is where we're at the moment, and that's problematic on so many different fronts.
So just on that point, will that be a contractual separation? So when you create the funding vehicle, your drawdowns will just be limited by your proposal acceptance. So if you think of the proposal being voted for as a kind of a contract.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But it's, you know, we realize that Catalyst needs its own vehicle to be able to manage it. It's funding for the Innovation Fund. I would think of it, it's a bit like holding a client account. If you're working for an asset manager, right? It's not your money. It's legally not your money. And you've got to have a separation of concerns between your own operational cost account and your actual, client account that's holding whatever it is, shares, assets, or other funds for clients. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Only this time there'll be a legal setup that means that there's only one beneficiary, and that beneficiary is the entire Cardano community, and the money can only be used to fund Catalyst innovations via the mechanisms that we've set up today. So that's what we're trying to do with that. And that means then we get loads of benefits that way, because it means then that we can manage that ADA and distribute it in exactly as per the milestones per projects. There's going to be no holdups, and it's just going to be a smoother operational setup.
Who will draft the service level agreement? Will it be an independent entity that will draft the service level agreement?
Well, it will be, in terms of the fact that we'll need legal counsel to do it.
Okay, great. And
wherever the jurisdiction is that we set up this Catalyst Trust.
And have you drafted a risk assessment for the transition?
Only in the way that we manage the operations currently. So we have to manage, we manage risk across the whole operations on a day-to-day basis. And that's across everything from technology to staff to GDPR, right? So in terms of this transition, we haven't done anything special in terms of risk assessing it.
I suppose I'm thinking of things also like currency risk as well. Like if you are funded and the ADA price goes down, then will you fall back? Will you have fallback plans for delivery, for example?
We've got the same currency risk as everybody else, right? And that is a significant problem for everybody, right? So you've got to figure out how you can manage your downside as well as you can manage your, and then you benefit if there's a massive swing the other way around, right? So if we've got a Catalyst Development Trust, then if we know that we need to make payroll, then we take down what we need to make that payroll, and we can convert it and manage it within fiat currencies.
Okay, thanks for answering my questions, Nigel. Just lastly, if it goes the other way, if ADA goes through the roof, what will you do with the surplus profit?
We'll calibrate the next fund. So basically, we're not here to take the piss, but we do want ADA to go back up to $3 as much as anybody else does. So what we've got to do is if it does go that way, we'd have to just come clean and say, okay, well, look, we need to make this cheaper, or in the next fund or whatever, we'll calibrate it.
All right, thank you for those questions, Stephen. Simon, go for it.
Thank you so much. So I have just one simple question, but before that, I do think that, to my knowledge, Catalyst is the biggest experiment in permissionless democracy, and I think we all should be really humble to be part of this. And it was certainly the reason why I fall in love with Cardano, with Project Catalyst, the idea that people just allow me through the internet to vote on these very important budget decisions. So I'm just amazed still by it, and I think that needs to be said, because there's a lot of criticism, and it's important to have conflicts, and this is the beauty of it. And I actually have just one question to you guys. Of course, we have small iterations, and that you put yourself out to vote. I mean, I'm almost certain that you will win, and that's good. Takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there and be judged like that. And we see that every day on Twitter. But I have just one question that I hope you answer. I read the proposal also, but I like to think simple, okay? And just within the next 12 months, after you win, what will be for you guys? What is the thing that you believe is the most important thing to work on within Project Catalyst to make it better?
For me, I think that others of the team, Kriss included, will have a difference of opinion. For me, it's consistent funding. Right, we've got to have a professional operation that gives consistent funding to the innovations and projects around us, right? And so that there's no choppiness anymore. We get this funding into the community because that's what's going to accelerate the ecosystem. So that's my number one, right? I would extend that and to say I'd like to see, this consistent funding then bleeding in and stimulating the 1694 funding and possibly funding through other sources. So if we have a successful catalyst, then maybe they can get funding from other VCs outside of the Cardano environment. Because that just keeps building and building and building the community and the ecosystem. So that for me is number one. I suspect if I ask Danny, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, his number one is to improve the community interaction and getting more and more community more involved. I like the ideas that we've had today about getting the community more involved in the fund operations. I'd love to be able to see that. I'd love to be able to try and break that down. And to keep improving the way that the community interacts, to develop innovations, support each other, review proposals, stop people taking the mickey on different things and making it work better. I don't know, Danny, what's your number one?
Yeah, it's difficult to pick a number one because everything is so interconnected. I know a lot of times people in general, like when we think of it, IOG doing this, IOG doing that. The truth of the matter is if IOG shows up tomorrow and community doesn't, Catalyst just simply does not run. And, that's already a state that we are in today. But equally so, when we talk about the sustainability is that because how Catalyst has been built up over those 9 iterations, it is extremely challenging to have that, as you said, choppiness, because it does not provide viability for anyone to actually transparently engage with the ecosystem. In other words, I know I spoke about it the other day. How do we expect people to participate in any ecosystem where you cannot plan your life? Because, every week or every month out, you don't know what is going to happen. And in order to sustain grassroots networks, it's extremely important to actually recognize that you can't just turn on and off things, because every time and we've come to learn it very much so during the course of past 6 to 8 months, how the community grassroots floor was gradually deteriorating, which was also us putting us in a hard spot, because it's you're trying to get operationally and everything ready at the backdrop of everything that's happening, Voltaire, and what it's going to look like in the future. And at the same time, like, okay, what is the minimum viable option to go forward, however imperfect it is, so that it stops that deterioration of the grassroots, so they can actually stay and participate in Catalyst. And now once you start creating that level setting environment where you have sustainability and predictability, you allow the communities, big or small, all the way up to the individuals, to actually plan their life. How do we expect people to plan their life 1 year in advance, or like to be there 1 fund or 2 funds from now, when there is no guarantee, right? So for me, that's extremely important, because the fabric is what holds the Catalyst together. And it doesn't matter. I show up tomorrow, and if there's nobody to support, essentially there is, and that's true for the entire team, and there's no community that is available to come in and support, this whole thing just doesn't work and make any sense. So for me, it's making sure that people have ability to understand what they're engaging with in a fair and a transparent way, and that the whole thing doesn't run as a volunteering effort as well. Volunteering is nice, but it's extremely expensive and taxing at the same time. And it's not something that we can reasonably expect any sustainable long-term endeavor to actually transcend time, most certainly not if we're planning, for the next 5 or 10 years. And maybe I'll just hand over to Stephen to chime on this, because I know he has thoughts in terms of what that actually means, because we have all these great ideas, but without actually infrastructure that enables us to build upon it, none of these pretty thoughts matter. And technology is usually one thing that hinders the progress in many instances. So I don't know, Stephen.
Yeah, for me, if I had to sum it up, I would say lowering the barriers to entry. So when I'm looking at the technology stack, it's about how do I make this so it's easier to deploy? How do I make this so it's cheaper for people to use? How do I make it so that my grandma could vote? How do I make it so that people can onboard easily, right? So these are the things that drive me is lowering the barriers to entry. And it's not just, when I'm looking at it, I'm not just looking at it from a pure, how do we run Catalyst, but, how do we deploy? How do we operate? How do we distribute UX? Right? If we give somebody funding to develop a DApp, okay, well, that's great. They've developed the DApp, but now how are they going to fund the operation of it? How are they going to pay to run it in AWS for 12 months so they can get people to use it, right? So I'm looking at this as well, not just from Catalyst perspective, because it's important for us to get the cost of the operation down, but how can we reuse this meaningfully across the ecosystem so that, if I have developed a DApp, I don't have to pay, fees to AWS to run it just so that people can use it. Right. So I see this is my particular aspect, making the system accessible across the board.
Thank you, Stephen.
Love the answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking. Joey, right back to you.
Yeah, I had to drop off for a phone call, so if I repeat some stuff, I apologize. So on the what's most important topic, many times in Agile, people ask that question, what's most important about your project? And I give them the analogy, if you drive your car off the assembly line and you don't have windshield wipers and you're in a rainstorm, how valuable is your windshield wipers? Because for me, it's more important to look at the assembly line. What pieces do you have to put together first to make the entire project complete, and what order you put those in? And I think Steve and Johnston will appreciate that, because when you're building something, you have to build it from the ground up, or so you understand what the whole process is. Every piece is important. You can't go without any one piece. So that's on the important piece. On the funding, I agree with Nigel. You got to have confidence in your funding. You can't plan, you can't budget, you can't engage people. If you go to engage a contractor, you got to know you have funds there. He's got to know you have funds. So, and overhead is always one of those necessary evils that managers or CEOs look at it. Well, why do I really need to spend money there? But it's extremely important. I don't care if it's the assistant secretary or whatever. You've got to be able to ensure that you have that funding and it's consistent, so you can predict what you need to do with your contracts or your functions. And on transition, and this is mainly to Stephen, I think, there's part of that proposal is to go off of ideal scale, is to try to replace ideal scale. Now, since I've been in the community, there's been literally time and time again, people have wanted to move from ideal scale. And that would probably be a very good place to gather the community together, Stephen, to participate, because that ideal scale is the core of our fund process. And there's a lot of skills. I mean, Lloyd and a lot of other people have the skill sets that they could really help. And maybe even if you have a team, they could help augment that team, so that they understand what's happening there. And so if there ever is a transition or someone leaves from your team, someone from the community could step in there. So that's just some comments. Thank you.
I think I really like that as well, Joey. I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to help do some testing, right? So if you're actually, if you're part of the team to be able to testing what we've got and how we're trying to improve, it at all the different, levels, right from the kind of development level all the way through to we get to sort of production, that would be an interesting thing to be able to explore.
I mean, I'd also like to say that a number of people in Catalyst actually come from the community already. That's where they came from. I actually feel privileged because I didn't come from the Catalyst community. I discovered Catalyst in the recruitment process. But you know, for me to be part of this process, I feel privileged every day to work on this project. And for us, and we've talked about this internally, as we need to resource in the development side, we're actually going to be looking in the community first, because we know that the community has, you know, it helps us, it helps you, because we already know you guys know what we're building, you understand it. Doesn't mean that we can always find the resources that we would need in the community, but that's actually where we tend to look first, right? So it's not like, you know, we see ourselves already as part of the community. So we're trying, this is, and part of this process, from my perspective, is that, you know, we're trying to embrace that more. We want to actually be seen as, you know, partners in this process, not just a necessary piece.
Thank you, Stephen. All right, over to you, Thorsten.
Now I have 4 questions. I try to make it 3 if it's possible.
All right, so for the matter of fairness, let's do 2. Then let's put Darlington through, and then come back for the other.
Okay, fair enough.
Deal? Okay, great.
So the first one is a very quick one. Will, assuming you get funded, will the milestone approval process, which we more or less kind of trialed in Fund 9 and which we roll out for Fund 10, be in the same way also applicable for this proposal?
So I can actually answer that 100%. There is one outstanding element that we still need to figure out. Obviously, we are heavily involved with the statement of milestones as is, and there is a need to stand up, basically to recuse ourselves completely from the proposals that if they get funded, we're not the ones who actually are involved directly in the approval of this process. And it is something that needs to be stood up still. And it's something that is squarely in sight, that we expect full community accountability. In the same way as we're essentially for Fund 10, as you know, the success of Fund 9 pilot and all the learnings means that it's going to be rolled out through the entire fund. That's also the thing about level setting the field, the same standards, because it's predictable, just like you have different milestones and deliverables, which also gives an opportunity if you don't deliver well, then you can be relieved of duty, right? Like it works both ways. So it's not just a one-way street. But essentially what we're trying to do for Fund 10, and we're going to start with the onboarding process for the rest of the Fund 10 cycle of the POA, the proof of achievement reviewers, is to empower the community as much as possible. And IO starting to take more of a sense checking role in terms of how the statement of milestones are being run, and sort of just monitor and over time completely remove ourselves from that, from that perception. But again, it's still a long process ahead of us. But essentially, there is a recognition that when it comes to the proposals for IOG, there will need to be an independent oversight, and that's something that we're baking for the rest of the proposals. It will just essentially mean that we would not be the ones who would be ultimately putting like a sign of approval, and which already is becoming, we're trying to make it more of a symbolic gesture for the rest of the participants in Fund 10. So that gives like another opportunity or highlight about how we're trying to basically take the ownership of different aspects of the operational side of the things squarely into the community. Because when I mentioned earlier that if we don't show up, if we show up and the community doesn't, the POA pilot can't work, right? We already see how many of the challenge team members are participating and what kind of work it does. So in a similar way, we expect the same treatment as everybody else for Fund 10 onwards. And I'm sure we're going to learn quite a lot from that process as well, but there'll need to be a separation of concerns in that instance, and that's entirely expected to transpire in that way.
Number 2?
Go for it.
Thank you. So your proposal is based on kind of a status quo operations, pretty much, I assume, kind of like you planned on the things you know. And to a certain extent, the operations is depending on fund size. So kind of like the number of proposals which you have to deal with, and you have to get through the system and itself determine the resources. What happens if a decision comes along which says we want to put Catalyst on a growth path? Do you have any contingency planned effectively on that side? Of course, you're asking for 12 months eventually, kind of, which is clear, but how do we prevent that this becomes a limiting factor in itself because it's planned on the as is? And if we more or less go back to the slide, is like it's not a stable thing in itself. Yeah. So kind of like there is this element of it's changing. I
think the easiest way to answer that, Thorsten, is you just you evaluate and then you respond. So the current proposal is an improvement on what we've ever done before. We've gone bigger than we've ever gone before with Fund 10. We've tried to look at our services and improve them as much as we can. If the volume of proposals coming through starts to increase, that's what we want. The quality of them starts to increase. We might have to come back and say, look, we need a bigger operation to be able to run this. Now, and once again, it will have to come back to possibly even like a working group with the community to look at the growth and then decide how we respond to it in an effective and appropriate way. I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but that's the way I think I would do it.
Okay.
Right? We don't want to limit growth, but we don't want to keep dipping in and saying we want more money. It has to be based on a results basis.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Thorsten. We're going to come back to you. I know you have one or the other on the back of your mind, and I appreciate your flexibility there. Mr. Kofa. No one has called you that in a long while, huh?
No, I don't think if anybody's ever called me that.
I just felt like doing it for the first time. Go for it. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Better late than never. So hopefully these kind of conversations come sooner rather than later. With that being said, how are we thinking? Two questions. How are we thinking about licensing and IP when it comes to the data that Catalyst is generating? Like, who owns that stuff? I know you mentioned legal people drafting documents and stuff. Will data ownership be covered? Because that's something I've been chasing since Fund 4 or 5. And there's always been some sort of explanation that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I think it's easy. I think it should be easy. Everything is owned by the community. That's what we're trying to do. All the technology is open source, right? Apart from where we've got GDPR considerations, right? How many proposals?
And that's been some of the sticky point, right? Not everything though, and even the data that's in the current system right now that Steven's team's working on, we've been playing with that for the last week, and a bunch of things are encrypted. And who holds those keys? So just would that be spelled out like legally, like specifically about the data? Who owns it? Who owns the encryption?
I can address that with you, Darlington. So that data is encrypted for GDPR reasons, right? Their email addresses. We can't publish those. But we don't want to hide the fact that we have that data. So we were given those email addresses. We have the responsibility to protect and hold that data secure. We hold the keys for that. But we don't actually want, as a technical solution, we don't actually want email addresses in the system going forward. We don't want to know people by their email addresses. We want to know them by their wallets. So places where we currently have things where you've got to use email addresses and passwords to register, like IdeaScale, that's one of the motivations for getting off IdeaScale. It's not just the UX, it's the fact that we don't want to actually have custody of that data if we don't need it, right? And we don't need it. So it opens up some, I don't want to sidetrack this conversation, but We want to make it so that you can participate. You can create systems that have 100% access to all the data, because we don't have to keep that stuff protected because we don't actually have it, right? I don't want your email address unless you want to give it to me, right? So that's the sort of back end, infrastructure that we're trying to propose here and trying to build in the next iterations of Catalyst, so that everybody can contribute with the data on an equal footing, and these GDPR concerns and other ones that other countries have actually go away, because then they're no longer relevant. Right.
And I think it's just, sorry, apologies. I was just going to add to it real quick that the one thing that often doesn't come very easy to recognize, and why we're pushing for a full open source, and really, as you outlined, Stephen, to go into the data availability where it doesn't become a concern in the state of the affairs where we've been up until now. It's a whole different, it's not as easy like get the data and do whatever you want with it in quotation marks, because there's real liabilities and issues. It's a whole different thing when you as an individual in a community member want an access to something where you're not really held liable for, and it sort of like becomes just sort of a piece of data that you're handling. Whereas if you flip the side on the other side of the table, there's actually real legal repercussions and liabilities actually make it very challenging to do that. And that's why there's laws and rules. And as long as there are LTDs and companies involved on a base layer, we're always going to have that problem. And that's why we need to transition. It's not also as simple as like I've read also in the chat, maybe we should consider another services idea scale. We're going to run into the same problem 30 days from the moment when we subscribe to an idea scale with a better UX. We can't do that, because then we can never really transition to the period where we can be in the environment where actually enables interaction without those data points that can be actually accessed. That's why, Web3 is a nice number at the end of the web, but it's a very difficult, intricate challenge and problem that needs to be solved. And it's not simply of like going from one idea scale provider to another, so that, it actually makes sense, so that we can actually be on a path on the growth, rather than, again, face the problem 5 minutes from the moment that we go to somebody else. And that's why it actually takes such a long time for Stephen and the team to reimagine and re-architect what it actually needs to look like. Yes, having a nice interface is one thing, but the infrastructure underneath it is extremely relevant, and it goes in tandem. We can't have just the nice things. We need to build them in a blockchain space that can actually transcend the needs of the space.
That's right. If we're going to build an idea scale replacement, what I don't want to have is just one idea scale replacement. I mean, I said this in the chat. I want to have it so that, we could have an idea scale replacement. Darlington, you could make your own idea scale replacement. If you've submitted a proposal in yours, I could go and edit it as a co-proposer in a different idea scale replacement, and we're co-peers, even though we're using two completely different systems, because the data is interchangeable and it's interoperable. And that's, you can look at it and say, oh, we're just going to make an idea scale replacement, but actually, no, that's not real. Yes, we're going to do that, but that's not the key of the proposal in that sense. The key of the proposal is let's make the data interoperable, so that this idea scale replacement that we build here is just an example of how we interoperate with this data, and it becomes fully universal, so that we can all consume it and edit it and participate on an equal footing. That's the real purpose of replacing idea scale. It's not just to replace idea scale. We can do that, right? Anybody could do that. That's obvious, but we want to improve it.
Yeah.
So
some of these targets sounds like it's maybe a year. I think maybe I was curious in like the short term, like when we are drafting these contracts for when this proposal is funded, like the current data set, whether you're going to delineate and say what's privileged and GDRP, which has like legal requirements versus what's not, and what would be available where, and I'm just wondering if that clarity is going to come within the scope of this proposal, or if that a future thing once this amazing new system come online.
Well, we're talking about two totally different things here. So one is operations. Well, we've got fiduciary duty to protect the data that we've been given in the past, and we're talking about development, which is in Catalyst systems improvements, which says we understand what the limitations of that are. Let's improve and iterate away from that so that it no longer becomes a problem in the future. So we're talking about two different things.
We are, and I think maybe I would like an answer from the operations side of things. What does that, would there be a written specification of that fiduciary responsibility? Does it cover everything? Does it cover emails? Does it cover proposal details, budget? What does it cover? What doesn't it cover? Because we don't understand that. What should we be able to access? Is it none of it, or is it some of it? Which parts?
I go for it.
I certainly think that we can look into that. I don't know whether we've ever had a request like that before, but it's certainly something that we can respond on, because there's nothing there that says we can't set the standard and say exactly what data is available to everybody. We don't think we've just never done it before. Look, guys, I'm gonna have to run. So I know we're going over an hour now. I don't know, Danny, how we wrap this session up, or if you guys want to continue without me.
I think it's
well. My next question is for Steven. So I hope we don't shut it down right this second.
I can continue for another 20 minutes till 3 a.m. Okay. and then I'll.
I mean, I was hoping to get Steven into bed sooner, but Nigel, I appreciate your time today. Thank you for answering the questions. Hopefully we're going to have another session like this sometime in the future as well. And I'm hoping that the community has found a value and some reassurances in terms of some questions are coming in. Again, as it was highlighted, we're not getting things right 100%. It's very challenging amidst everything that's happening to look for every detail, and I'm hoping that, and as we always do, is to reassess, reevaluate, and then course correct whenever that's needed. So I don't, Nigel, if you wanted to wrap up yours in your own words, then we're gonna release you and stay a little bit longer.
Just to say thank you. Really appreciate the chat. Really appreciate some of the ideas that have come in, and it's great to have this interaction. It helps us. Right, because we just keep improving together as a whole unit, as a community. So keep it up, right? So I'm going to go and feed my daughter. I've got my daughter just hanging outside the office right now. She's absolutely starving. So I'll just say thanks again, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
All right, so Mr. Koffel, we're gonna keep Steven till 3 a.m. Let's see. How about we do?
Oh my gosh, now I feel bad. Steven, you're up at 3 a.m. Sheesh.
How about we do one question each, Darlington, and then one question to Quasar, and then let's stop also the recording, and then we can do a little bit banter for people who want to stay behind, but I also want to be respectful of the time and everybody's expectations for the room as well. So, Darlington, go for it.
So the question is around bringing the community in and that process. Again, I don't know what the target is or what transition looks like. Like, so far we've gotten the open source code, and people like me can get in there and follow along and testing early and do stuff around. But what we're building with Catalyst is not that different than the GitLab product. And like building a massive, complicated ecosystem for doing a wide range of interrelated things. And they do everything in the public, like the dev planning meetings, the tickets, like all of that is open for community contribution at the ideation stage before anybody even writes a single piece of code. Is that what we're heading, or are we? What do we mean when we say co-creating, bringing the community in?
That's where I want to go.
What does that mean?
I mean, I can only talk from. I'm one person, right? So I can't. I'm not talking here from total. This is exactly what Catalyst is going to do, but that's where the development team would like to see us go, right? And that's what we mean when we say these things, is a system like that. And part of I mean, if you have a look at the proposals that we're proposing, all right, I'm going to keep coming back to it for reasons. There's two. One of them is the key point of that, which is really difficult to talk to most people about, is the decentralized authorization of the role-based access control, which is we're extending, what my idea there is to extend basically what we do for voters to all the other roles in Catalyst. That's what will allow you to be able to act as a proposer in one system, and for that proposal to have the same merit as a proposal placed in another, and for you to actually, if you're co-proposers, to interact. Because I now no longer need to trust your credentials because you've signed your proposal with data that I can reference on chain. And your co-proposer can trust that because they know only you could do that, right? So this is the sort of, and I want to develop this as a, as an extension to the current voting registrations. And I've sort of kind of worked out what this might look like, but I don't want to do this by myself because I can't. It's not, I could come down and say, yeah, this is what we'll do, but what's the point of that, right? I want you to come and have a look at what I'm suggesting and go, hey, what if we do this? What if we do that? Let's have a conversation. And so part of if you look at, the Catalyst Voices proposal, there's a section in there. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we're saying 12 months to develop this, because I've got 3 months laid out. We actually sit down and we talk about what decentralized role-based access control could look like and what we actually want to build. That's not us saying we're going to build this and define this and say, this is what you will get. I'm saying, give us the money so that we can actually do the work of specifying it. And we'll work with you for 3 months as the full community, right? Whoever's interested in this particular problem, and solve this. And now this problem doesn't get solved now just for Catalyst. It's a generalized solution. We can use this for other DApps. So, every DApp has the same problem, role-based access control. Like, what are my registrations? What can I do in this DApp? What am I, how do I authenticate my data? How do I encrypt it? All right. We have these common problems across DApps, and Catalyst is just a big DApp at the end of the day. Right. So that's that's the core part of Catalyst Voices. And then if you go, okay, well, we've solved this bit. Well, no, we haven't, because unless we actually implement it in something purposeful and test it, we don't really know if it works. So the rest of Catalyst Voices is like, okay, let's implement Catalyst with this new tech that we've now co-developed. Let's implement a front end for it and implement it into the back end, so we know we've got a working model of it. Now everybody can actually co-build on this. And we've built a front end that people can replicate in different languages or different ways. And we now interoperating our data, because we now no longer have a central source of truth for the logins. We don't need OAuth. We don't need any of these other invasive systems. We can just trust what people are self-registering on the blockchain, right? So that's kind of what I'm trying to push forward in Catalyst Voices. So yes, okay, I'm building an idea scale replacement, but that's kind of, for me, technically, that's a side effect of actually solving this other problem, which is how can I get proposers to interact without needing their registration, without needing logins? How can I get them to have, if you and I, Darlington, want to do a proposal, we want to share it. I don't know where you are actually, but we want to collaborate on the internet. But I don't want to actually see I don't want anybody else to see our proposal till we're ready. We want to be able to contribute together, right, in an encrypted way. Well, how do we do that? Currently, there's no way. I've got an idea of how we could do that, right? But that's sort of where I'm looking at, so that you and I, we could exchange encrypted data, never having met, just simply based on our registrations on chain. They're all done through our wallets. That way, we've got trust in one another. And then we go, okay, we're ready now, and we can publish that, co-publish it, and go, oh, look, here's the proposal that Darlington and Stephen made together, and we've done that over 6 months, and we take out the gating where we go, oh, you must do your proposals in this 3-week period. No, you and I, we could work on this for a year, and then when we're ready, that's the fund that goes in, the next one. And we know that we can do that because we know the funds are running at a regular cadence. That's the kind of technology I'm trying to develop for us, so that we're building these foundational pieces that we can all then build on, right? The other proposal takes away all of the back ends. It takes away the necessity for us to have, centralized back end systems or centralized UX. The other proposal allows us to actually completely decentralize the UX. So you're talking about, restriction of people being able to operating system where I was talking about, I developed a DApp, I got 50,000 ADA, I'm in Central Asia, and okay, that's great, but how do I deploy that? How do I actually pay for AWS resources to deploy this thing for a reasonable amount of time so people can use it? What, do I go back to Catalyst and ask for more funding? It kind of gets a bit, it's restrictive. So you end up with only the people who have actually got money can actually deploy their DApps, right? If I've developed a cool DApp, I actually don't want any money from it. I just want people to use it. Well, how do I deploy that? And there's lots of those, right? And there's lots of people who want to develop that. So the other proposal, even though we're talking about the future of Catalyst, which it is, it's actually wanting to build an infrastructure engine that would allow us to fully decentralize UX, the data distribution, everything, right? And we can use that for Catalyst. That'll make things like community tally so much easier, but it will, it'll be a powerful tool for Catalyst, but I'm going to want to develop it so that we can use it for all these other use cases. So if I've developed a DApp under Catalyst, I can deploy it in here, and now anybody across the world can actually use it. And I don't need to pay for infrastructure.
That sounds great, Stephen. And I don't know how much of a whip the lawyers hold over your team at IOG. And maybe I need to read that proposal again, but that code creation did not show up in the milestone for the open source setup. I think the most we got was there will be facilities for the public to comment or query the work undertaken.
No, that's the initial milestone for setting it up. But if you actually look at the proposal for doing the role-based access control, in the milestones there's time for actually. I mean, there has to be anyway, because I'm proposing a CIP. So at the very least, it has to go through the CIP process, which incorporates community collaboration. I'm hoping that people like you in our community are going to put their hand up and go.
I hope so. And it's good that you're new, Stephen. And maybe that's some of where my skepticism is coming from, because so far we've been given finished products and been asked to.
Yeah, but that's you're talking. So this is,
and even
as I mentioned in the chat to somebody else.
Yeah, like papers. There's always been like some rounds within IOG that happens with it first, and then we get the.
That's right.
It's
I know that's
in
what
clay
you've
form.
been getting in the
It's not
past.
baked yet, but it's like in clay form.
I understand that's what you've been getting in the past, but that's not what we're proposing for the future.
Well, this is great. This is great. I'm looking forward to it. Yes, this is good to
hear. I mean, that's one of the reasons we want to put ourselves on the same footing and say, okay, well, if you guys want this development, we're not saying you must. I mean, I'm passionate about this thing I want to propose, as is all proposers, and I would expect them to be, right? But if I can't convince you that it's a good idea, then maybe we shouldn't build it. But if I can, then let's build. It has to be built in the same way as all the others. It has to be built in the open. And for me, collaboration with you guys is critical. Right? It's where I'm trying to push the entire ecosystem. But there's a huge technical debt that we've got to work through. We're getting through it, but we've got to work through that. I mean, what you're seeing now and being able to deploy, that's been 6 to 9 months of serious effort to get it to the point where you can actually do that. Quite candidly, when I first started with Catalyst, I could not run the system myself, right? So where, there's been a mountain that's been moved, it just doesn't look like it, right? So
no, I've seen a mountain. By the way, the mountain is missing the proposal details, the historical data that's in that report right now. I'm sure it's coming.
Possibly because what that is actually what we had in the Vit Servicing Station APIs. So that initial historical data is just what we had in Vit Servicing Station. Over time, we're going to backfill the historical data with all of the historical data from ID Scale. But it's a huge effort. It's a mountain of data. I mean, you've got...
That makes sense. That's not what's coming in 1 week, right? I mean, I know you said
that's not what's coming in 1 week. What's coming... I mean, what we're aiming for with the continuous deployments post Fund 10 is that this data is just going to continuously build itself up in the back ends. So you will have access to that fully, right? It's not like... And it's not like we're going to just run Fund 10 data and that's going to be lost. And it's going to be archived away. It's going to be like Fund 10 data is going to be part of the continuing data set. We just add a new fund to it. And the reason we need to do that is because, like, as we pay out and as we develop, the data in Fund 10 actually evolves through Fund 11, Fund 12, Fund 13. It doesn't finish, right? And so we want to keep that data alive. So in the future, all that data will be there. In the past, we're going to have to go and backfill it. Right.
Shall we give Quasar the chance to roll his hand?
I want to
Thank you.
Quasar's questions.
Quasar, thank you for your patience. Apologies.
Yes.
Go for it.
Well, I think I'm known in the community as having great patience. So no problem. I came in late, so you may have already addressed it or talked about it, but these category scoping workshops that are supposed to happen and how that's going to play into Fund 11, play into the proposal that we're discussing. Man, like there's so much in my mind, things to do that's so contingent and interdependent on all of this that it's a crazy, like when are we going to start these workshops? And are these workshops, the category scoping workshops, the same as the working groups that people are talking about, which I'm not sure what the working groups are at this point. And, does it help if we go to iDiscal in our profile and export all of our data so we actually own all our data and then put it into the new system? Like we could do that in a week. I'll do it right now. I'm kidding.
Right. I would probably let Stephen comment on the feasibility of migrating entire thing on user by user basis on an individual trigger. I think that would have been a UX nightmare. Probably doable, but in terms of the workshops, so I was putting together today the brief. I'm looking on a time frame to begin within a 2-week window. Having a first one, having at least 4 of them, so 3, and then at least the final one, so that throughout the August and September, we have those bi-weekly workshops to work through. And then that would give us October basically to implement and prep should everything be aligned and ready for Fund 11 come November 1st, which is tentative target. So October would be used on prepping it. Now, in terms of whether that's same as the working groups, I think that word is being used interchangeably between different rooms and contexts. There are existing working groups on the technical side of things of Cardano development as a node. There's lots of different working groups with regards of like, whether, it might be a prison working group or things of that nature. So I don't know if that what you have in mind. What we were discussing here, that there was actually one proposal that we weren't able to get over the line just this time around, and it probably, and as Kriss alluded to it earlier before he dropped off, is that coming to the Fund 11, should there be an opportunity, we would like to propose another set of proposals, which would be essentially talking around working groups / committees and how would that actually work in terms of the governance structure when it comes to the Catalyst stack as well, because we're spending a lot of time now trying to level set the operational side of the things and how that settles into everything. But then there's, not that this is already a very difficult problem, quote unquote, the governance part of it will become even more endearing. And, we're seeing how these things play out also with the CIP-1694 and everything. So that's probably the direction in terms of like where it's headed, but it's just so much to do that it's just not on the plate today, and we need to stagger the start and essentially get through them bit by bit, because it's just unfeasible for us to move any faster at the current setup.
Okay, well, what I'm going to say is you're going to be ignored or completely not considered. I would recommend or ask that we find a way to put the workshops and retrospectives open and live right now while we're doing these reviews and while everything's fresh on their mind and everybody's engaged. Because if we do workshops later and retrospectives later, we lose everyone. They're gone. They didn't get funded. They're mad. But you can only fly a kite when it's windy. We can only get this information when everybody's here.
Yes, but we also can't expect at the same time the same people who are participating in the stage to be also splitting their attention of effectively participating at workshopping and retrospecting it at the same time. By having said that, there's multiple swim lanes. The workshops are meant for the categorization to figure out what Fund 11 categories are going to look like, right? Like we have an idea of 3+1. Do we think that's actually going to be 3+1? Maybe be 3+2. And then there's these big cats, small cats. There may be some guardrails and things like that that we will need to consider. But those are purposely left out as open questions. So that is sort of like co-produced in terms of like what that Fund 11 looks like through those series of workshops. And those will be focused on that part. And we're keeping it focused for the sense of deliverables, right? Because if we are trying to put too much of the scope in one sense, we're not going to be able to get the meaningful iteration into the one segment. It's just like we can't, in the same way, like we can't level up every feature request. We need to sort of like prioritize, like we're going to pay attention to this one, or we're going to pay attention to that one. In parallel, once the community review stage is done, there's an expectation that we would like to hold a retrospective on like what has been the outcome and efficacy. That the problem being is that it directly ties also to the voter outcome, because in the past we've seen direct correlation between the SSQA stage and the voter outcome, and we won't have that full picture until the vote closes. That doesn't mean that we can have a preliminary retrospective on the operational side of the things tied just to the community review side of the things, but there will be an element that is missing by default, because one of the major hypotheses in this iteration is what is the impact of the QA stage on the voter behavior. We've seen how much was their correlation and almost like a capture in terms of the attention. So it's they're not mutually exclusive, and what we found, having a scope to address one thing at a time tends to have a bit of a better outcome, because then there's just too many things on the table, and you know, equally ourselves as a team, and it probably is similar feeling throughout the community, get overwhelmed very quickly. Where do we look? Which of these fruits do we take off the table first? So that's just thinking. It's not settled in stone, but that's the frame I'm generally having in mind right now.
Good. I thank you for that. And if that's what the scoping, category scoping is the idea of the 3 plus the 1, that's enough information to go off of and use for it. Thank you. Thank you guys. Stephen, you're a rock star. Whenever you're done with IOG, you can come play in Catalyst, and we build cool shit. Not that you guys aren't, but we do it faster too. I'm kidding. I'm trolling. So that's why you made me wait. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, guys.
I appreciate you. By the way, Stephen, I don't know if you were paying enough attention, but I did volunteer you for another gig on the Pacific Town Hall.
I saw that, and I've accepted it.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I don't know which time. What time of the day is it in UTC Pacific Town Hall? Just for reorientation.
9 a.m. on a Thursday for me, so I may only get, depends on what I'm doing. If I'm in that town hall, I may only get like 5 hours sleep that day, but I'm sure I'll be fresh.
All right, awesome. Well, we've been at it for a little while. Again, I do appreciate your time as well, Stephen. I don't know if you wanted to close out on any last thoughts before we shut down the recording, and let the viewers maybe watching now on YouTube as well go by the merry ways and think.
I mean, only just that, you know, it's always awesome to come here and talk to you guys.
Short and sweet. I love it. Well, thank you everybody for participating today. If you made it through the recording up until now, hopefully we've managed to stitch the parts together with a little bit of a jumping back and forth in the beginning. But again, thank you for your attention, and talk to you around. So have a good day. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.